They're short, but they're powerful. Hi, it's Emily. So if you like literature and languages, this might be the channel for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe so other people who have the same taste as you can also come across this video. So the thing about short novels or short stories or short books in general is that you have very little real estate to develop your story, right? Needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. Hopefully a satisfying end. Now, what happens is I tend to like, I don't know about you, but I tend to like short novels or short stories that have really high concepts or they have an idea that they're trying to develop. So for the high concept, I chose some dystopians, and I want to talk about a few dystopians because it happens to be one of my favorite genres. I don't know about you guys, but it's such an easy escape, because it's so, oh, you hope it's so foreign. Fahrenheit 451. Now, the concept is we follow a guy called Guy Montag, and he's a fireman. Now, this book has one of the most iconic first lines, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read it. So, it was a pleasure to burn. Now, what he's talking about is books. He's burning books. So, we have a totalitarian government that has absolute control over thought and the written word. So, Fahrenheit 452 happens to be the temperature at which paper burns. So that's where the title comes from. Absolutely love this. A longer novel that you might want to check out if you like this sort of book is The Shadow of the Wind. I have a review on that, but it's a longer novel, so I'm not gonna include it in this list. Now, another dystopian that I want to talk about is this duology. Now, you don't have to read the duology. I want to talk about just the first one because it is quite short and it is just magnificent. Now, Margaret Atwood is a novelist and a poet, and she is quite familiar with how to use figurative language and language in general. So in her novel, in this dystopian future, we have a post-Second American Civil War that gave rise to the Republic of Gilead. And here we have a regime that enforces rigid social rules and enslaves the few remaining fertile women. And we follow Offred, which is an amazing name that she gave to her character because she uses a lot of color in this dystopian future. The other book I want to mention is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Now, this is an old copy. It is falling to pieces, but it is amazing. And this one talks about the dangers of the natural progression towards utopia and the loss of the personal identity and how important it is for humans to have an identity and to know their identity and protect it. Of course, I can't talk about dystopians or literary devices for that matter without talking about the amazing George Orwell, who perhaps might be one of the best authors out there to use allegories over the last couple of centuries. Now, I have Animal Farm with me here, but I also want to talk about 1984, which talks about governments out of control. Each of them, whether you're talking about the revolution or you're talking about Big Brother, and the expression of which we got the reality show from. So the reality show had cameras all over a house watching all the contestants' every move, right? So yeah, the idea comes from the novel. Orwell called the language he created for the party's propaganda machine newspeak. Let's take a look at some examples. It doesn't take long for the brain to spot the fallacies implied by the wicked juxtapositions, and it doesn't take long to understand how obscure terms like unperson and more equal and gaslighting slogans like war is peace and freedom is slavery can dissolve any sort of logical and critical thinking. Another type of short novel that I really enjoy is literary fiction, especially modern literary fiction. I have two that I want to talk about here. Actually, I have more than two, but the first one is the fantastic F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, other than his short stories, which you might have heard of, for example, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which was adapted into a movie, very different from the story, by the way. And it was interpreted, or it was starring Brad Pitt. This novel, which was adapted into a movie, and it starred Leonardo DiCaprio, this one for me is a linguistic masterpiece. Now, his writing here is just off the charts. The way that he uses the white noise consonants, I like to call white noise, but like F for the flickering lights. See that sound? I call it white noise. And he uses F and S's a lot to play with sound as well as light. Of course, as you're talking about flickering. Interested at all in good writing or good storytelling, check out this one. Check out The Great Gatsby. Also, talking about beautiful writing, another American author I'd like to mention is Edith Wharton. I read The Age of Innocence last year. It's really quite recent, quite fresh in my mind. I really cannot stop thinking about this unacquitted love story and the fireplace scene. But her writing is just so beautiful. Don't get me wrong, this is probably not something you want to read in a day, although you can, because she does have a lot of references that if you want to check out and just pace yourself, there's also room for that. If not, just follow the story and I'm sure you're going to have a blast. Another literary fiction literary fiction author that I want to mention, and this one is a collection of short stories on fiction. So he's writing about writing, so on the craft of storytelling, by the Argentinian author Jorge Luis Borges. And the literary references in this case are just next level. But if you enjoy storytelling and if you're at all interested in the craft, I highly recommend Borges. And you can read one story a day. So the first nonfiction book that I want to talk about is by Elie Wiesel, and this is a nonfiction, and it's the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and he is a survivor of the Holocaust. Now, this was translated by Marion Wiesel, and this is quite short, and you can knock it out in one day, but that does not mean you're going to recover fast. You probably won't. This is one of those books that linger, if not forever, for a very, very long time in your head. The second nonfiction that I want to talk about is a lot lighter, but very important. And this, for me, I think is the best way for anyone to introduce themselves to Virginia Woolf. I would like to mention that A Room of One's Own is perhaps the best way anyone can get to know Virginia Woolf's writing, because if you jump straight into her fiction, which is short because she is a modernist, and one of the things that they were known for is having short novels. So my favorite, perhaps, out of these two is Mrs. Dalloway, but it is not something that you can read in one day. As maybe you can if you're really smart, or if it's a reread. But no, if you haven't read any Virginia Woolf, definitely try her nonfiction first and foremost, especially if you're into feminist literature. Now, another genre of the short books that people enjoy, and I really enjoy, is philosophy. Now, I have a copy of The Prince here by Niccolo Machiavelli. And in the words of one of my viewers, this is anemic in comparison to his other work. But it's still really interesting, and it's probably most people's entry point. Now, this talks about how governors and how leaders can use political perception to their advantage. The other one of his work talks about how the people can behave and should behave in the face of government. But if you're interested in that time period, post-Renaissance or middle, thick of the Renaissance, really, then check out Niccolo Machiavelli, philosophy book Prince, that I was quite impressed by at the time when I read it. I think I was 17 when I read it. Is Candide by Voltaire. Now, if you're interested in that Enlightenment era or that movement at all, I highly recommend checking out Voltaire. Make sure that your critical thinking skills are on, but you should always have them on. Another short story that I want to mention that's highly philosophical and perhaps not as well known is The Alienist by Machado de Assis. Now, Machado de Assis is the father of Brazilian literature, and for good reason. He is a genius. There's really not much to say other than read this novel. Think about what he's trying to say. There are a few literary references here, but it's not quite as heavy as the other literary fiction books, and this is a short story, so you can definitely get it done in one day. It is quite a long one, but it's still a short story. On that note, check out Kafka. So the Metamorphosis, perhaps one of the most famous pieces of literary works on the planet, and that's because it is quite striking in the way that he used language, in the way that he used symbolism and allegory. So, imagine one day you wake up as a vermin. How would your life be? So, very high concept, highly thought-provoking, very much like Agua Viva by my favorite author of all time, Clarice Lispector. Now, Agua Viva is, it looks big because my edition is actually the manuscript and it has a few essays on the author. So it is a lot smaller in reality. But, so don't let my edition fool you. But Agua Viva talks about wanting to feel music and feel the words and tell the story by the vibration of it, to drink from the source, to eat from the source. It is a mind-blowing, thought-provoking, one-of-a-kind sort of short novels that you can knock out in one day, but that does not mean you're going to be done with it in one day. I have read this over 17 times, so that should give you an idea of just how fantastic this novel is. Fun tidbit. Cazuza, who was a rock star from the 80s from Brazil, very much like Freddie Mercury, of Brazil. This was his bedside table book, and allegedly he read this over 100 times. And I can believe it because his song writing has a lot of Clariceisms to it. I'm going to explain that one day a lot more eloquently. But today is not that day. Now, let's move on to Albert Camus, because I want to ask you guys, you reader who is watching me, if you've read this novel, I'd like to know your opinion. because I think it's really interesting that the original title, L'étrangère, technically means foreigner, but this novel was translated with two titles in English. One of them is The Outsider, and the other one is The Stranger. Now, Agua Viva was also translated with a different title initially. It was called The Stream of Life, I believe. And this was a double entendre that the author intended, so they had to go back to the Agua Viva because it also means stream of life, but it means jellyfish and it means movable water. Anyway, and in this case, I think that you have to spend the whole novel to find out that, not belonging can be a choice as well as a prerogative. So let me know, which one of these titles, which one of these translations do you agree with? Should it be called The Outsider or should it be called The Stranger? I vote The Stranger, by the way. But let's move on because I still have some books that I want to talk about. And the first one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, my edition of this short story is part of a collection of novels of mystery from the Victorian age. And I have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by R.L. Stevenson here in the end. It's quite small, one of the smaller ones. And I also have Carmilla. Now, Carmilla by Sheridan de la Fonu is a queer vampire Victorian story that I think is very niche, but if you're into that, then check that out. And if you like vampire stories, Dracula, if you've never read the original, is actually quite small too. So Bram Stoker and so Dracula and Carmilla, if you like vampire stories, definitely go for that. If you're more into sci-fi and you want to check out Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, that's also on the smaller side. And this one is told in a series of epistolary, it's an epistolary novel, so it's told in a series of letters. And it's such a fast read. If you're interested, I highly recommend all of these. If you're curious about Westerners and you never tried them, a good one for you to start is All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. And this one won the Pulitzer Prize. Sorry, this author won the Pulitzer Prize because of his book called The Road. And though most of his books run on the smaller side, not all of them are. I read this one last year and I thoroughly enjoyed his beautiful prose. I hadn't read a lot of books set in the border between the US and Mexico, and I thought that was new for me. I also really enjoyed that about 5% of this novel, I would say maybe even perhaps 10% of this novel is written in Spanish, so that was quite fun. Now, lastly, if you're into mystery and you enjoy, you thought Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a mystery novel, was a fun read, you might want to try the Queen of Mystery herself, Agatha Christie. This is one of her best standalones, in my opinion. And then there were none. This is about receiving a fabulous, irresistible invitation to an island of a millionaire. And then some people just start dying slowly, but surely, all the guests. So she's the OG for that plot. And this is one of her best novels. Make sure to read that if you're into mystery at all. Now, I think I've talked enough. I have a lot of short books that I enjoy that are children's classics. If you want to take a look at them later, we can talk about them later. Let me know in the comments if you want to talk about children's classics, either for you or for you to buy family members, your own kids or nieces, nephews, whatever the case may be. But let me know which one of these books you've read, which one you've enjoyed, which ones you haven't. I thoroughly enjoyed reading your comments last time. I got some fabulous recommendations. It looks like I'm going to be reading Shogun soon. I'd like to say that I have read Dostoevsky, and I plan to do a review soon of some of these great books. Let me know which book you'd like me to review. If you'd like me to review any book. Now, if you haven't yet, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the community tab. I'm always posting quizzes and polls, all sorts of pictures, and every sort of information that you can imagine. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful, and I'll see you next time. Bye.